Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live on a Saturday, right before the Senior Bowl kicks off. I know it's officially draft season, so hopefully everybody is going to sit down and watch some prospects later this afternoon in the Senior Bowl. So excited to have a great conversation today about the biggest questions of the Chargers offseason. And joining me are my guys, Tyler and Alex. Alex, we'll start with you, man. What's up? How are you doing this afternoon?
Doing good. Hopefully the Chargers can find their next Senior Bowl MVP in this Senior Bowl today, and study all the draft prospects, and up and running on draft season.
Yeah, we know Tom Telesco has placed a strong priority on the Senior Bowl in past years, so definitely keep an eye out for all of that. And coming up next week, we'll have Alex Caston from Chargers Wire, who's going to be starting with us, and he's going to join our show next week and dive into a lot of the Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl stuff, takeaways, big standouts, all of that good stuff. So it should be fun next week. Tyler, what's up, man? How are you doing this morning?
Doing very well, although reviewing all of that Senior Bowl one-on-one stuff, I got to make sure I know what's a win and what isn't a win, because it seems like DL and OL Twitter are just going at each other, trying to determine what here is a win and what isn't, and what a pancake is or whatever.
Yeah, I know. There was obviously that big clip that went viral of, I think it was the Syracuse offensive tackle, and ended up driving the defensive rusher like into the ground after an inside move. And then all the offensive tackle Twitter was like, okay, but that's where the quarterback's going to be. Like, that's not really a win. So, yeah, excited to dive into all of that. So, like I said, we're going to talk about the biggest questions of the Chargers offseason today. Most notably Keenan Allen's future, and then a lot of the internal free agents that the Chargers are going to be deciding between next month, really, when free agency starts. So I'm going to dive into all of that. And then also, before we do get started, as always, please make sure and like and subscribe wherever you are listening or watching. All of that does really help us grow our show. So that being said, we do have a slideshow today that we'll dive into for the offseason decisions. Thank you, Tyler, as always. Did some great work with the slideshow today, as always. So, like I said, a lot of this is going to be focused in on Keenan Allen and then some of the internal free agents. So, obviously, the big discussion around Keenan Allen is related to, just with his future with the team. Are the Chargers going to be able to keep him? Do they have to cut him? Will they have to trade him? A lot of that stuff. So we're going to dive into all of it. We're going to analyze both sides of the argument, if you will, and then we'll have a discussion about it afterwards. So first and foremost, Tyler is going to take us through a lot of the financial stuff behind this decision, if you will, that the Chargers are going to have to make.
Yeah, it really comes down to this. If it were a free contract or a rookie deal or anything cheaper, of course you'd keep him. But looking at the numbers, the Chargers are $20 million over the cap. And if you cut Matt Filer, that gets you some of the way there. But to really become cap compliant, if it's the only other move you make, and it won't be, cutting Keenan Allen does save them enough to get them to be cap compliant if you pair that with a Matt Filer cut. So right now his cap hit is $21.7 million. If they cut him, they'll save $14.8 million. The following year, which is the last year of his deal, he's owed $25.8 million. So if they do cut him, then they'll save $23.1 million. This is the year for the out. There's also, I guess, technically one baked into after this season as well. But this is really the first year of his deal that they're really able to get some savings for cutting him. And then, of course, in 2025, he's an undrafted free agent, or excuse me, an unrestricted free agent, just like I believe Mike Williams is. So, long story short, they can save $14.8 million by cutting him this season, which would basically make them cap compliant and give them, more flexibility moving forward.
Yeah, like in a vacuum, I think you look at the financial flexibility here. Obviously, you have to get cap compliant, like Tyler is talking about. Chargers currently $23 million over the cap. Obviously, they need $3 million to be able to sign their draft picks, their 7 draft picks that they have. So this is a big thing, and I think a lot of this too. Like we'll get to this in a second, but the restructuring aspect of this is very interesting as well, because next year they're able to essentially get out of the entire contract after this upcoming season if they want to. So if they don't touch it at all this year, they can save $23.1 million next year. But if you restructure him now, that pushes more money into next year. and it doesn't allow you to have that flexibility of essentially getting out of the whole contract after next season. So financially, this isn't as cut and dry as people want it to be, right? Like, it's not like they can just decide to keep him, and everything's going to be okay, right? Like, this is a legitimate decision because of the money. Like, Daniel Popper came on our show last week and said, like he wrote about in his article yesterday. And so this is something that the Chargers are going to have to at least restructure and work around the contract this year.
All right. Sorry. I was going to say, and that's really what it comes down to. So I was responding to my mom. Mom, thank you for the super chat. Priorities. But that's really what it comes down to is do the Chargers want to, with a lot of their players, kick that money down the road again? Can they afford to do that? With someone like Keenan Allen, you do have to prepare for that departure for them to move on. He could have a really good season, this upcoming year, and I think he will if he stays with the team. He could have another good season after that, but you don't want to keep kicking the money down the road to the point where you're unable to move on from a player, move a player, or do anything else right as Herbert's contract starts to get kicked in. So, yeah, I don't see a restructure here. I don't see a lot of great options for restructuring, but we'll have Arjun on later at some point to really break that down for us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Alex and I are going to break down kind of the arguments for keeping him, for moving on from him, and then, like I said, we'll just kind of talk it out and see where we stand. So, Alex, why don't you make the argument for the Chargers to move on from Keenan Allen this offseason?
First of all, I'm not necessarily even on team cut Keenan Allen.
Yeah, right.
I think because
we're
I
just
asked
analyzing
Daniel
both sides.
Yeah, right. Because I asked Daniel Popper a question, people are like, "Oh, you hate Keenan Allen, and you're trying to kick him off the team." No, obviously Keenan Allen is still like a very good receiver, easily top 20 in the league, and the financials of it are just kind of what we're talking about here, and all the different ways the Chargers can go about it this offseason. Like you guys said, I don't think a restructure makes sense, really, in any capacity. If you're gonna restructure people, it's probably Joey Bosa or Corey Linsley. But yeah, Keenan kind of going into what is effectively an expiring year on his deal, considering the cap savings next year. This is kind of the last Keenan year, unless they do decide to work on some kind of extension with him, possibly, which is also a way that they could open up some short-term cap relief. I think it's a pretty simple argument, right? Obviously, they can save $14 million per Tyler's calculations if they were to cut him this year. It's one of the ways that they can become cap compliant, which is what Daniel Popper talked about. And looking at the injury history, right? Obviously, he had the groin injury this year. He is going on 31, which is stated here, and the Chargers are $23 million over the cap, right? And Keenan Allen is kind of your get out of cap jail free card, if you want to call it that. Technically, people have pointed out, yes, they can cut Khalil Mack, but Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco have traded for Khalil Mack, right? And they restructured him last year. So he's not going anywhere, despite his cap hit being higher than Keenan Allen or, being a little older. He's going to be on the team next year. They want to see this edge tandem with him and Joey Bosa. So then the next guy is Keenan Allen. And per our discussion with Daniel Popper, the Chargers kind of were looking at some wide receivers last year. They didn't end up drafting one. And so now going into the draft this year, I think it's less about Josh Palmer. I mean, Josh Palmer could, in theory, be the guy who gets promoted to wide receiver 2 without Keenan Allen. I think if you get rid of Keenan Allen, you're most likely drafting a first or second round receiver, probably at the very least. A lot of people talk about Jalen Hyatt and some of these other options that the Chargers could have at their disposal if they decide to use their draft capital in that way. But effectively, you would be cutting Keenan Allen and getting potentially a 4-year rookie contract in addition to, Mike Williams being a potential cut next offseason as another way to kind of like save money before you offer Herbert this, big albatross contract that he's probably going to get this offseason. And so, yeah, I think that cutting Keenan Allen is not a simple decision at all. As Steven will talk about, there's the chemistry with Justin Herbert. The last 4 or 5 games of his season this year after he did come back from the injury were all very solid games. I would say he even had a pretty good game against Jacksonville despite the loss in the playoff game. Overall, I think that you can probably still say that he has 1 or 2 years of his prime left. It just feels like this probably, if you are going to move on from Keenan Allen in a Tom Telesco move on 1 year too early as opposed to 1 year too late kind of way, which he's done with plenty of free agents that he's signed and created these outs in their contracts before, this is probably the year to do it. And it's not an easy decision because you don't have a lot of like immediate, okay, this person is going to step into Keenan Allen's role and become the wide receiver, one immediately. Mike Williams would be the guy who becomes wide receiver one, but you're talking about replacing Keenan Allen's production, right? As opposed to, Mike Williams's production on his own. So not an easy decision in that sense, but on the other hand, I do think that if you're talking about getting a first round wide receiver contract, talking about getting a second round wide receiver contract, this is the way that the Chargers kind of can move forward and take themselves out of the cap jail, potentially get faster in the wide receiver room per se. And we can talk about it a little bit later before Steven gets into his argument for keeping him. But the Chargers, if they were to still stay with the 4 wide receiver, 1 returner type of formation, they don't have a lot of ways to add speed if they keep Keenan, Mike, and Palmer, right? And then you're keeping maybe a DeAndre Carter or somebody else as a returner. That leaves 1 wide receiver spot if the Chargers are to still stand by, what they've been doing under Staley the last few years. So, there's not many ways to add, past the contract. There's not many ways to add speed to this wide receiver room or improve it in that sense without making this cut. I know that will sound crazy to say, and speed is not everything. You don't need to have 4 guys to have team speed, marrying the pass to the run game and plenty of other things. But at the same time, I do think that when you talk about the situation the Chargers are in now, I think those are effectively the main factors that you look at in addition to the cap hit when it comes to moving on potentially from Keenan Allen.
Yeah, so just one thing I do want to point out after watching a lot of the Kellen Moore Cowboys tape, I would be shocked if they roll into like the next season with the same receiver roster method. Like I think the amount of empty packages that Kellen Moore wants to do and has done, like I think you need at least 5 capable receivers on the active game day roster to do that. So that is a good thing from, watching the tape and stuff like that. But in terms of where this roster is at, like I feel like this would be a more cut and dry decision if the Chargers had more than just Josh Palmer like ready to go. Like if they had drafted, I don't know, let's say like a Romeo Dobbs or something like that in the 5th round this last year. And like you felt comfortable with him, heading into next year, if they had taken a Bo Melton or if they had taken a Ja'Quari Robertson, like the guys that we all wanted them to take, right? And those guys had flashed enough and you had Palmer and that rookie, then I think it becomes a more cut and dry decision. But like Alex is talking about, there's a lot of different layers to this conversation, right? Like obviously there's the financial side of things. There's the lack of people behind him. So it just is, it's a very complicated situation. And I think for me, like Tyler has talked about this as well as the first bullet point is, his chemistry with Justin Herbert. Keenan Allen still in the last 6 weeks of the season was, I think, number 2 in the league in 3rd down conversions. And, that's been, Keenan, like he calls it third and Keenan or whatever, like 3rd down, Mr. 3rd down. So that's a really complicated thing. That chemistry, just the ability to bring the best out of Justin Herbert, it makes things difficult. His rankings over the last, few weeks of the season since week 11, he was 2nd in the league in targets. He was 1st in the league in receptions. I'm going through this whole route. He's 5th in the league in total yards. He was 6th in yards per route run. Like he was still playing at a really high level down the stretch of the season. And like Tyler has here, best per play stats of his career since 2018, like coming off of a major hamstring injury and then re-injuring it. So, he still has a lot of good ball left. I don't think this is like, some people have compared it to the Casey Hayward situation. It's like, well, Casey Hayward was injured and not necessarily all that good in 2020, but he wasn't all that good in 2019 either. So we had like 2 full seasons of not very good ball plus injuries. With Keenan, it's not that, right? Like he's played good football over the last 2 years. He just has the injury. He's older and it's the cap space. And so those are a lot of the things. And then like Tyler put down here, the transition to a new offense previously in 2021, it made things very easier to have Keenan Allen able to run every single route and able to, handle that kind of workload with Justin Herbert. And you could presumably see that happening again under Kellen Moore's offense. And I think Kellen Moore, part of the reason why he comes here, right, is the ability to have Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. And it's not just like, a situation where you're able to, like, you have to kind of rebuild the receiver room. I think having Keenan Allen and his previous, time with Amari Cooper, there's a lot of parallels there. Obviously, I think Amari Cooper is a little bit more explosive of an athlete, but, stylistically, those are very similar players. So, having Keenan Allen on this roster, I think makes the transition to a new offense for the third time in 3 years is definitely something that makes things easier for Justin, for everybody. And, keeping Keenan around, I think just elevates the play of everybody else. Like, there's a lot of complicated layers to it, but it's hard for me to envision this team getting better by moving on from Keenan Allen, because, like, sure, theoretically you could replace his production with Palmer plus a rookie, but what happens on third downs? Like, who becomes that guy? Because we've never seen Mike Williams become that guy. Like, as much as we all like Mike Williams, and we all talked about him being the playoff X factor and things like that, he's never been a go-to third down receiver. I don't think that would be Josh Palmer in this instance. And is Jalen Hyatt or Zay Flowers as a rookie going to be that guy? I have a hard time thinking in, like, clutch moments that this team improves by cutting Keenan Allen.
Yeah, they will not get better, at least in year one, if they cut Keenan Allen. I don't think there's any way you could see them getting better. And I think that really just also speaks to the draft class in general. I have not watched any receivers outside of Jalen Hyatt, but it sounds like this isn't a great class. And I believe, Steven, you were in the Discord or in our chat or something, mentioned that your wide receiver 1 in this class might have been wide receiver 4 last year. So,
yeah,
like, what are you feeling with this class overall? I'm not saying they have to go look for another Keenan Allen. Like, oh, go find another Keenan Allen. Well, I'm sure like every route running prospect will be compared to him. But, like, what are your first impressions of this class? Because I've only watched Jalen Hyatt. He's a very different player than Keenan Allen.
Yeah, absolutely, very different. I'm a fan of Jalen Hyatt. I think the thing about taking a receiver in the first round, or frankly even the second round, is that you're drafting that guy to eventually be your number one receiver. Like, that's the goal, is to draft one of these guys and they're going to be a number one receiver. And whether it's T Higgins in the second round, or whether it's Christian Watson in the second round, or Garrett Wilson, Drake London, like all these guys, like, if you're drafting a receiver in the top 60, your goal is to get them to be a wide receiver 1. And I just don't really see that. Like, I think maybe Jackson Smith-Njigba could get there, but he's a smaller, probably slot only receiver at this point. So, like, are you taking Jackson Smith-Njigba? I'm going to get that eventually. I'm sorry if he's listening to the show. I doubt it, but that's a tough name to get, but does not roll off the tongue. So does he get there to be a wide receiver 1 eventually? Maybe. But I have a hard time picturing any of these receivers that I've studied to be a wide receiver 1. I have not studied Zay Flowers yet. Still waiting on the ability to watch all 22 there. But, like, I really like Jaden Reed from Michigan State. I like Josh Downs from North Carolina, but I don't think those are number 1 guys. I feel about them in a similar vein where you're talking about like a Josh Palmer, where, okay, maybe they can be a wide receiver 2 at best. Probably a really solid wide receiver 3. So that's the thing. Like, everybody who's in favor of cutting Keenan Allen is like, oh, they can just draft a receiver and it'll be fine. And it's like, but then Mike Williams is probably coming off the books, 2 years from now or a year from now. And then you're going to be left with Josh Palmer and, let's say, Jalen Hyatt. Neither of those guys are a wide receiver 1. So it's just, from a draft class perspective, it makes things tough, because I really can't see any of these rookies coming in and flashing like true wide receiver 1 potential. I would have, I think, I don't know. I can't really decide who's my wide receiver 1, because they're so different in this class. But at minimum, I would have Drake London, Garrett Wilson, and Chris Olave ahead of everybody in this class. At minimum, those 3. And then you're talking about like Jahan Dotson and players like that. I wasn't a huge fan of Traylon Burks, but I don't feel like there's a true like wide receiver 1 player in this class.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say with this wide receiver class in general. I haven't gotten like super into it, but I do think the conventional wisdom is that no, it's definitely not as good as the 2020 class right now. And then certainly you look at 2021, and all the wide receivers who went in that top 15, top 30 range. Right now, at the very least, it doesn't look like it's quite as good as that class either. I will say, I wonder if, Tom Telesco does kind of look at this as almost a Tyreek Hill-esque situation, though, in terms of Tyreek Hill leaving the Chiefs, right? I mean, that was like a huge offseason argument for 6 months in terms of whether the Chiefs would be better or worse without Tyreek Hill. And it turns out they're still pretty good. So here's the thing, and I don't think that that's a one-for-one comparison by any means, because the reason Tyreek Hill left is because the Chiefs didn't want to pay him $30 million a year. That is the real reason he left. Keenan Allen, if the Chargers were to extend him, would not be getting, that much money, and he probably would be on a shorter-term deal. But I do think there is kind of like, okay, if we can maybe trade Keenan Allen and get like a 3rd and a 5th round pick for him, get some additional draft capital, you're not getting a Tyreek Hill package, obviously. But we can get something back in a trade for him, and sort of kind of go from there in terms of debating who our wide receiver 1 through 5 is in this class, right, on the Chargers big board, and then maybe start replacing him that way, maybe go on some buy low options in free agency, right? If you look at what the Chiefs did last year, obviously signed Juju Smith-Schuster for basically nothing, and then got MVS at a decent rate. So you can kind of look at what the Chiefs did with Tyreek Hill as the model for the Chargers moving on with Keenan Allen. So while I do agree that you could kind of look at it and say, oh, there's not many good wide receivers in this class, certainly not in this free agency class, I do think you could look at it that way, but I also think you could look at it as there's probably other ways you can replace the Keenan Allen production, aside from just boiling it down to only the wide receiver class.
Yeah,
I definitely think that I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, from a financial standpoint, before Tyler jumps in, if you trade Keenan Allen, you can save $16.3 million. So going back to the first slide here, if you cut him, it's 14.8. If you trade him, it's 16.3. And then obviously you maybe get some draft capital in return. So that is another layer to it as well.
Awesome. I also completely forgot what I was going to say. So
sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah. So the trading him, I think, makes it more interesting to me. If I'm going to move on from Keenan Allen, I would prefer to get a draft pick for him. But then also that requires a team being willing to take on his current contract. That requires a team being interested in a 31-year-old slot receiver coming off of a hamstring injury. So I think a cut is probably more likely than a trade, in my opinion.
I agree. I think it's more likely. I just meant, from this perspective, either way of moving on, if you can get a pick back, that'd be great. I do think a cut is more likely than a trade because, like Steven said, it's probably pretty unrealistic to be like, all right, well, I'm going to take $20 million of Keenan Allen on my cap sheet, unless you're just a team that has a whole lot of money to spend, but there just aren't that many teams out there right now. You could look at a team like the Giants and be like, they have a lot of cap space, but they have to extend Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley and do all these things, right? So there's not a whole lot of teams who need a wide receiver that just have tons of money available. Maybe the Patriots with with Bill Belichick, they could need a wide receiver. But aside from that, I don't think there's many teams who would be willing to absorb that cap hit. But yeah, I think either way that you do move on from him, I think, you could say, again, the wide receiver class isn't that good. There's not a ton of efficient ways to replace him. But I also feel like, you could kind of say that with a lot of wide receivers that have been moved on from before. Of course, you would like to get capital in a trade, but I don't think that it's totally necessary.
Yeah, I think from a trade team perspective, I think obviously the Bears have a ton of cap space. They could certainly be in the market for a receiver, but are you really interested in trading for Keenan Allen? The Falcons, same thing.
Right.
Those are two rebuilding teams. Maybe the Giants look at Keenan and say, he can really help us kind of expedite our rebuild around Daniel Jones, but they're also going to be paying Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. So, it's tough to find a team that's ready to go for Keenan Allen at this point.
Yeah, it's tough because it is kind of, would we rather have Keenan Allen for likely 1 or 2 years, or would we rather have a cheap 5-year wide receiver with a 5th-year option, right? That is kind of, I think, the calculus behind that and why it is harder to trade Keenan Allen than Chargers fans think.
Yeah, and a lot of people will say like, oh, they can get like a second or third round pick. I'm like, the way that this contract is structured, I have a hard time believing a team like the Bears, even with a lot of cap space, would give up a second or third round pick. I think you're probably realistically looking at a team, giving you maybe a fourth at best, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, people will point to the Cowboys trade and how they didn't really have any leverage to necessarily get a ton for Amari Cooper after saying that they were going to cut him. But at the same time, like Amari Cooper is a younger player. He still had some, flexibility on his contract, didn't have the injury history, has more versatility. So, if the Chargers traded Keenan Allen away, like I wouldn't be surprised if they got like a 5th round pick in return.
Yeah, and I do think who made the poll? Maybe it was Boltbeat, but I think it ended up being like 75% of the fans thought they were getting a first or second for Keenan Allen.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I was just like, I had so many different permutations of tweets I wanted to send out. Look, guys, I mean, if they convince, the Seahawks that he's an edge rusher and get 2 firsts for him, that'd be great, a la Jamal Adams. But otherwise, guys, I don't see that happening. So I don't know where that's coming from, but if they do trade Keenan Allen, if you're for that, which I totally understand, if it's trade or cut, of course you'd like to trade him, but don't expect that, first round pick to come walking through the door.
No, I do think fans of any football team overvalue the players on their team constantly. I remember having debates about trading Jerry Tillery, and people were like, we could get a 5th round pick for that. And then I remember that last offseason, and then I was like, no. And then they ended up having to cut him. But I mean, so Keenan Allen definitely is not a first round pick type of player.
And if you think Keenan Allen's a first round pick kind of player, like you should probably just keep him. It sounds pretty good.
Right.
Yeah.
That's part of it as well. But yeah, I definitely don't think they can get a first round pick back for him. But I think that's also partially just because of how the wide receiver market is. And like people said in the chat, even in the Amari Cooper deal, Dallas only got a 5th. And that is one that I think Jerry Jones probably wishes he could have back based on how Dallas' season played out.
Yeah, basically, like if you're gonna trade somebody, away like this, you have to take like multiple bites at the apple, right? Like the Cowboys traded him away, and like their solution was like, okay, we're gonna go draft Jalen Tolbert in the 2nd round, and like that was all that they did. And Jalen Tolbert like barely saw a field for them this year. So, like Alex is saying, if you're trading away a player like this, it's got to be like, a cheap veteran. It's got to be also a high draft pick, maybe double dip in a later round as well. Like you need multiple bodies in there to replace a guy like Keenan Allen. So, before we move on to the next topic here, I just want to get like our gut feeling of how we see this playing out. So, Tyler, as it stands on February 4th, how do you see this playing out?
Oh, they're not moving on from him. Nope,
like 100%.
I don't think they are. Yep, not moving on.
Alex, what about you?
60 they keep him, 40 they don't. I think I'm a little bit closer to like a 50-50 range than I am. Simply because of what they can do in, changing this offense around and moving pieces and getting cap compliant. Cutting Keenan Allen is not the only way to do that, or I should say moving on from Keenan Allen in general if you want to talk about a trade. But I do think it's something Telesco would consider. And whenever Telesco says, I'm definitely not doing something at his press conference, you also think there's probably a decent chance he could do that. And that was ultimately his answer on Keenan Allen. I totally get why people would be like 100% they're keeping him. I'm just not there yet because of obviously the injuries this year and, what the Chargers could potentially do to replace him. And, kind of depends on what Kellen Moore wants too. I think hiring a new OC probably, like Steven said, you can make the argument that like it makes it a little bit more likely they keep Keenan Allen and installing a new offense. But if Kellen Moore wants a different type of like wide receiver one or, wants to draft a guy and get more speed in there, could also make it a little less likely, right? So that argument could potentially go both ways. So I would say 60 they keep him, 40 they don't.
Do you think this decision has been already made? Because do you hire someone like Kellen Moore and then figure it out? Or do you feel like you let him know ahead of time, like, okay, this is our plan, and so do you want this job? Although it seemed like they probably spent a good amount of money on him.
I think you're not hiring Kellen Moore without a plan in place. Like I think they have the decision made.
I agree. I think they already know whether they're moving on or not.
So I don't think it's 100% like Tyler does. I'm a little bit more optimistic than Alex though. So I think I'm kind of in between here. I'd say like 75% they keep him. We'll see if they restructure him, but I kind of think that's less likely too, because I think Tom would want to have that ability to get out of the contract next year. So that's kind of where I stand. I think they keep him. I think they find cap space in other ways. Restructure Joey, restructure Keenan, and we'll dive into all of that, like Tyler said, with Arjun in here. So, all right, if you're here in the chat, let us know what you think. Do you think they keep Keenan? Do you think they restructure him and keep him? Do you think they cut him? Do you think they trade him? Let us know what your thoughts are there. All right, we'll dive in here to kind of the secondary point here is going to be, what do the Chargers do with their internal free agents? So do not expect the Chargers to be very active with external free agents this year. It's going to be very difficult for them to get to a point where they can go out and get some big fish. And so they'll have some important decisions, regarding these players. So running through this really quickly from a financial side of things, and then each of us are going to pick two to argue in favor of keeping around. A lot of these projections on the screen here are courtesy of Brad Spielberger from Pro Football Focus, who, in my opinion, is the best in the business at predicting contracts. So if you see a projection on here, that's because Brad had them in his top 100. So first and foremost, Trey Pipkins did not make his list, so he did not have the projection there. Generally speaking, you're looking at a starting caliber right tackle. It's kind of like a $5.5 million floor, maybe 6-7, depending on how good they are. Because he's still a younger guy, I think you could get probably like $9 million per year maximum. We'll see how that one plays out. He did have Kyle Van Noy on there and had him as a projected 2-year, $6.5 million contract. So nice little raise for Kyle Van Noy after he himself feels like he boosted his value on the open market. Very big raise for Mr. Morgan Fox, who is projected for a 2-year, $9 million contract. After being a vet minimum, I think it was like $1.5 million player for the Chargers this year. Drew Tranquil as well, 2 years, $8.5 million. So Kyle Van Noy, Morgan Fox, Drew Tranquil, all had career seasons and all are getting a pretty sizable raise, all of them making Brad Spielberger's top 100 list, all in the back 50 for what it's worth. And then also DeAndre Carter and Bryce Callahan are really kind of the two other ones that we're going to be talking about. So didn't make their list. I was a little surprised Bryce Callahan and Trey Pipkins didn't make the list personally. Obviously, Bryce Callahan, a little bit older, has some injury history, but still was a great player this year. So that's the financial side of things right now.
Alex, would you like to start with DeAndre Carter?
No.
Okay, so Alex, we'll start with you, but we'll just kind of go through the list and call it like a draft, if you will. So we'll go through some of the arguments for keeping each of those players. Again, keeping in mind kind of the contract that you're talking about. So Alex, you go first, and then Tyler will go, and then I'll go, and then we'll snake it.
Yeah, if I have to make an argument for keeping two of them, I think my first is Drew Tranquil. Actually, I know we learned last offseason that Brandon Staley does not love linebackers, but you kind of have to keep Drew Tranquil, and Brad Spielberger has him at 2 years, 8.5. Spot Track, for what it's worth, has his market value at $4 million per year, so a pretty similar projection. If you're going to turn down, or we assume they're probably going to turn down the 5th-year option on Kenneth Murray this year, and relying on that to be your linebacker one just kind of reminds me, prior to signing Morgan Fox, what they were prepared to do with Jerry Tillery last year. And I just think you need Drew Tranquil to be there. He's not very expensive to re-sign, and you can kind of figure out other ways to sort of get around his costs. Yeah, it is like a significant cost on the cap sheet. It's not nothing. You're not paying him the veteran minimum. But at the same time, if you just want kind of solid linebacker one play, and you probably need it if you are going to, let's say, Kyle Van Noy walk in this permutation, because he's not going to kind of rotate around the linebacker potentially. I think that you just have to keep Drew Tranquil. Had a career year, and he's just not very expensive. Ultimately, And the reason that they could kind of let go of Kaiser White last year was because they had Drew Tranquil, right, on his rookie deal still. That, I guess situation just doesn't exist for them this year. They don't have someone that they can truly depend on to anchor the second level of their defense. And so I would actually start with him. And for me, it's a tough call between Morgan Fox and Trey Pipkins for me. Although
you get the one. You get the one.
Oh, we get one? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. If we get okay. If we I thought we were doing two, but okay. If we're just doing one, Drew Tranquil.
All right. Tyler, go ahead.
Okay, I will go with Morgan Fox then, so Steven can have Trey Pipkins, especially because I didn't watch as much Trey Pipkins as Steven did. With Morgan Fox, it's tough to look at this list and say, oh, it's easy or difficult to replace these guys because I have not watched the draft. At this point last year, I knew who, some guys in the third round would be or the fourth round would be. At this point, I really don't. So for me, though, with Morgan Fox, it's so difficult to replace him. And there's no one on the roster that will come in and be what Morgan Fox can do. Austin Johnson was a solid pass rusher, kind of two-way player for them last year, but he got hurt. We didn't get to see everything. Sebastian Joseph Day, if Chris Jones is over here on your graph, Sebastian Joseph Day's win rate is on the other side, and not in a good way for win rates and pass rush productivity. It's not Fehoko. Right now, it's not Otito. So you're kind of stuck. Like, you have to take a defensive tackle that can rush the passer pretty early on in the draft if you move on from Morgan Fox. He'll be expensive. Don't get me wrong. Like, this is not going to be a cheap signing. I actually think he'll be, he could get more than I think Brad's projecting. But you have a player that we all unanimously agreed was a top 10 player for the team last year. And it wasn't even like 10th. I think some of us had him, 6th or 7th or 8th or whatever it was. I just think you have to bring him back. I think that it's too difficult to find another guy who can give you, if he starts, 50, 55 potentially pressures on a season, just somewhere in the draft. So I really think that someone like Morgan Fox has to stick around. I think he's too valuable. You see he's not Chris Jones, but you can see what the value of a good pass rushing defensive tackle can be with someone like Chris Jones in this postseason. We saw how much Morgan Fox changed several games with his presence.
Mm-hmm.
I really think Morgan Fox is either the priority or the second guy behind Trey Pipkins.
Yeah, Morgan Fox, I think it's like probably the most complicated replacement plan because rookie defensive tackles are so hit or miss. Like, you can draft somebody like somebody in the second round to come in and be an interior pass rusher, and then that guy might just put up like 10 pressures all year. Like, with Morgan Fox, I think you're getting the most complicated replacement plan. All right, so I'll go with Trey Pipkins. Obviously, he's going to be my pick. For me, that's another one that I think is a complicated replacement plan. Like, I think there's a lot of people who are in favor of just saying, hey, like, we're going to move Jamari Sawyer over to right tackle, and that's our replacement plan. He's a 6th-round pick. It's a ton of surplus value. He played really good on the left side. You know what you're getting out of him. But I think for that also, you're talking about somebody who's going to be changing positions again as a 6th-round pick. Like, this isn't a 1st-round pick, somebody that's extremely, high ceiling talented player switching positions, and somebody that's shown the ability to do that. So I think Jamari Sawyer to me, he's still a guard. I think the team views him as a guard as well. And so I don't think that Jamari Sawyer is a realistic possibility for this team at right tackle. That's just how I view things as who he is as a player, and also what the team wants to do. The team wants to do a lot more wide zone action. They want to get into that McVay world. Obviously, Kellen Moore is not from that tree, but the Cowboys did a lot of wide zone schematic things as well with the Cowboys throughout his tenure. And so Jamari Sawyer just he doesn't fit that prototype of, wide zone offensive tackle. It's one of the reasons why this team last year pivoted to a lot of, inside zone power gap scheme from a running standpoint over the back half of the season, was because Jamari Sawyer obviously does not have that kind of athleticism. So I love Jamari. He played fantastic. He saved the season. But to me, he's still a guard. So to me, the choices for right tackle are you re-sign Trey Pipkins or you draft somebody in the first round. This is not a deep tackle class. Like, you're not getting a third round right tackle pick and starting him immediately in right tackle. So to me, you have two choices. You re-sign Trey or you draft a right tackle in the first round. That's it. That's the only way, because you're talking about a coach and a front office staff that wants to be a trench team, and you're not doing that by getting a significantly worse right tackle. So that's the argument for Trey. I think, outside of his play, which to me, he's an offensive tackle on the rise. He's somebody that's just now finding his stride. And like, at some point, Tom Telesco has to start re-signing his, post second round picks. Like, it's getting crazy talk. Like, if we're going to go another year, another draft class where none of the, post second round picks are going to get re-signed. So just from a team building standpoint as well, I think there's a strong argument. And then listen, like, Trey earned it, man. Trey played at a top 20 level among all offensive tackles this year, while spending half the season dealing with a sprained MCL. You're talking about somebody who was higher on the pass blocking efficiency metric than a significant amount of tackles behind him, like we talked about him during our top 10 show. And I think he's severely undergraded on Pro Football Focus. Like, to me, he's a fantastic run blocker. He's an above average pass blocker. To me, I don't see them getting better at right tackle by letting Trey Pipkins walk.
No, you'd be forced to take someone in round one, and even we know that can be so hit or miss. And it's not like we're picking, Rashawn Slater at 13. Again, I haven't seen this class, so I do not know if there's great options between 20 and 32. I have no idea, but you certainly don't want to bank on it. And this situation is even worse than like wide receiver, because they don't have anybody waiting in the wings that can be a legitimate right tackle that they feel is a right tackle. They've been developing to be a right tackle or even a left tackle. Yes, Jamari Sawyer could do it, but he was drafted to play guard, and he said as much. I interviewed him. The whole point was to kick him into guard so he could be really, really good against the run. He's going to be awesome. He's going to save the Chargers a ton of money this year. They're going to get a huge return on him playing left guard. Otherwise, it's Storm Norton, Foster Sarell. That's what they've done to develop tackles over the last year or so, and that's it. So unless you want to absolutely pigeonhole yourself into taking a tackle in round one, which I don't love when you're picking in the 20s, you had to bring back Pipkins, who I think is going to be less expensive than maybe we might think, just because of the lack of true starting history, the injuries. Doesn't have that first or second round bias or anything. Not really a big name guy, not a big college guy, either. Sioux Falls isn't exactly Georgia or Ohio State or something. So yeah, I think you have to keep him. I'm not saying sacrifice Keenan Allen to do that, but I would certainly sacrifice some other players or other things to get that done, because I don't want to pigeonhole the Chargers to getting a tackle in round one.
Yeah, and then the other thing too is, like, if you move Jamari to right tackle, then you have no plans at guard either. Like, right. Because they don't think Brendan Hymas can play. Like, they've said that, they've proven as much over the last few years. So if you move Sawyer to right tackle, you have to find a starting left guard and then also a backup swing guard as well, which they already have to do because they don't have one right now. So it's just, the depth along the offensive line is really poor right now. So I think you bring Trey Pipkins back, and then it's much easier to go find depth after you have your starting lineup solidified.
Yeah. I think that Trey Pipkins after Drew Tranquill would be my second pick if I had to, bet on it right now. But it just makes, I think you could talk about getting surplus value, which is something that people have talked about. Like, if you just get a starting right tackle who you took really late on like day 3 in the draft, like, yeah, I mean, that's like a cheap deal. But like Steven said, it's kind of overthinking the problem, right? Because you're opening up another hole, assuming they cut Filer and now you have to get another guard, right? As opposed to just being able to do, okay, well, here's Slater, what was I going to say? Slater, Salyer, Lindsley, Johnson, and then Pipkins, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's the very simple solution and probably the best possible Chargers offensive line you can construct for the 2023 season. And so I think, you could talk about moving him to right tackle or moving Salyer to right tackle and doing all these things. But ultimately, when you kind of come back, Trey Pipkins is still the best solution, right? Or at least the one that has kind of that creates the fewest holes in this offensive line that you would have to then fill in free agency. in the draft, money in free agency that you didn't spend on Trey Pipkins or a draft pick, then you would have to then spend on a right tackle because you didn't sign Trey Pipkins, right? So yeah, I think the argument for keeping it was pretty simple.
Yeah, I agree. So my next pick here, we'll snake things. I'm actually gonna go with Bryce Callahan. Bryce Callahan to me is still an elite slot corner whenever he's healthy. You're talking about a player who's one of the highest players in terms of fewest yards allowed in the slot. You're talking about a player who gives up a lot of the fewest snaps per reception. So I think he's still a really high level corner. And I also just am concerned about the plan behind him. We didn't really see a great return from Jaw Taylor in the back half of the season. Like, I think they really like Jaw, and I think he still has a solid future ahead of him. But I still think he's a bit of a work in progress. I don't really know if they want Asante Samuel Jr. to play in the slot. I don't think he really is able to handle that from a run defense standpoint. So I think Bryce Callahan is probably, besides DeAndre Carter, I think Bryce Callahan is probably the most affordable player on this list, just given his age and given his injury history. But I think Bryce Callahan was so good for this team this year. And so I think I think he's one of Staley's guys as well. Obviously, they went out of their way to get him after the draft. So I don't think he costs a lot. I think he's still a really good player. And it gives them a lot of flexibility in the draft. Like, if they re-sign Bryce Callahan, they don't necessarily have to go out and draft a corner, in the top 4 rounds, top 3 rounds, to come in and challenge for a starting spot. Because then at that point, you still would be able to have, Michael Davis, Asante Samuel Jr., and Bryce Callahan as your starters. We'll see what happens with J.C. Jackson and his health. And, if Jaw Taylor and Dean Leonard can take some steps forward, you feel pretty good about that cornerback room. So, to me, I would like to keep the status quo in the secondary, and I don't think Bryce Callahan is going to break the bank at all.
The only thing for me comes down to then what is the plan for Asante Samuel Jr., which I mentioned that they could potentially look to trade him, not because I was in favor of that, but like, you're stuck with 2 corners, and if you send Callahan, you've got your third. I know JC isn't going to come back immediately and certainly not at full strength, but like, I don't really know what you do there. And I don't know if they know what they want to do there yet, because it's such a tricky situation. I didn't think they would think, 5 weeks into a season that they would both not really want JC on the field and he would get hurt with that contract. So really, really tough. And I don't know if they even believe in Asante Samuel Jr. to be a slot corner to play the run like they would like him to, because you've seen that. They've been switching him out for Jaw Taylor. So I'm in favor of bringing Bryce Callahan back. If he walks, I get it. I at least feel a little bit better about this plan with someone like Jaw Taylor rather than, no offense, but like Trey Pipkins to Foster Sarrell. They've been trying to make this change. I don't believe he's prepared themselves. But I think Bryce Callahan is going to be so inexpensive that just another repeat deal of last year, to be completely honest.
All right, Tyler, your next pick here.
Okay, cool. I'm going to force Alex to take DeAndre Carter. So I'm going to talk about Kyle Van Noy. Kyle Van Noy for me was, if you look at the beginning of the season, I don't believe you say, oh, that's a player we have to bring back. And it was pretty disappointing in terms of the numbers. I thought the film was better than the numbers, but still, you want pressures, you want sacks. Wasn't getting that, wasn't great against the run. And then things just really flipped in the second half of the season. And, with him being the leader that he's been, the grandpa that they call him, he did a really, really good job to close out the year. I mean, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sacks to close out the year. And we're talking tip balls for interceptions. We have, 37 pressures on the year. Every single game, he was playing edge 3 that you wanted, and really like an edge 2. We were missing that the entire year, and he really turned it on season. So I think he'll outprice himself from what the Chargers are. But if they can find a way to bring him back, I'm all for it. And I just at this point don't want to buy that Chris Rumph is going to be edge 2.5. Like, we have to assume all these guys are a half of an edge better than they need to be half of an edge better than they're projected on the depth chart, because Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, someone's going to get hurt, someone's going to miss time. And I don't believe that Chris Rumph is there yet. So if they can bring him back, great. With that said, I don't really buy that they are going to be able to.
Yeah, I think that Kyle Van Noy is certainly up there, probably in my top like 3 or 4 if I had to like structure this list, just because of all the uncertainty about Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa's availability. Now, Khalil Mack, to his credit, has played a full season in 3 of his last 4 seasons. If you kind of take out the 2021 season, where he only played 7 games, but Joey Bosa's obviously hasn't been able to stay on the field. And so if you're talking about, just having a guy who's prepared to step into an edge role like Kyle Van Noy did this season, I think he's a pretty critical value there. The case for DeAndre Carter is pretty simple. He doesn't make any money and he plays good special teams. He made a whole whopping $1 million this year. Spotrac has him getting a big bonus to $2 million next year. So, I mean, really, and I think there is, some feeling about DeAndre Carter in that, like, yeah, he had some like bad drops or some like, I would say not so great wide receiver moments down the back half of the season compared to when he first stepped up. But optimally, if you're keeping Keenan Allen, Palmer, drafting over wide receiver potentially, DeAndre Carter is much back in his role that he was supposed to be last year, right? Which is wide receiver 5, right? He's supposed to be your special teams guy that you have on kickoffs and punt returns. Steven said, or as Tyler put in the slides, he was an elite punt returner this year, definitely top tier in that regard. And just bringing him back makes sense. And in transitioning, it's sort of what Steven talked about with Keenan Allen in terms of like knowing the system and now transitioning to a new OC. You have a guy who's kind of able to do whatever he has to do, from potentially being wide receiver 1 in certain games this year to being 2, 3, 4, or 5 on the depth chart any given week, and just kind of rolling with it. Has a pretty decent connection with Justin Herbert as well, I thought, this year. And so, yeah, to me, how inexpensive he is, and how he's kind of really plug and play to whatever slot you want to put him in on the depth chart. And he's sort of, the face along with the kickers and J.K. Scott in terms of this Ryan Ficken special teams revolution that he had in 2022, if you want to call it that. I think that it's a pretty simple decision to bring DeAndre Carter back. I wouldn't be surprised if they let him walk because, I mean, we've been cycling through returners and special teams guys and things of that nature. Washington even let him walk last season after a really good year. But to me, it's just a pretty easy decision.
Yeah, I don't think, like, obviously I think he's probably the easiest to replace of this list. Like, I think you probably take, a 6th-round receiver, and he can probably do the same kind of stuff in terms of being a returner, being that 5th receiver. But, Ryan Ficken has a good amount of say on this roster, particular like spots 48 through 53. So I would not be surprised if Carter came back at all. We heard all offseason that he was had a great rapport with all the quarterbacks, was a friendly target. So I wouldn't be surprised if he came back. I would like to see them get a different kick returner, though. I think that's a safe thing to assume that happens this year.
Just bring him back and don't run the sweep play. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, get somebody else to be the jet sweep guy. Yeah. All right, we had a couple super chats in here quickly that I want to acknowledge. If I can scroll up and find the old one.
Yeah, there was one from some guy. I will find it. I just had it and then I lost it. Just like DeAndre Carter on some kickoff returns. Okay, here we go.
Okay, so I scrolled up way too far then because there was one in between that. Some guy said, just want to say thanks and that you're all awesome for both being the best, most informative Bulls channel and putting up with all of us. Appreciate that. Obviously none of what we do is possible without you guys. So Solo Man recently said, give me little Tank Dell in round 4 and let Carter go. So Nathaniel Tank Dell from the University of Houston, I swear, looks like a Deshaun Jackson clone from a body style standpoint, and was really good at the senior practices this week. So wouldn't hate that at all. Obviously, you'd be talking about probably taking 2 receivers in the first 4 rounds to get Tank Dell at this point. And there was another one too, I think.
There was a new member.
Oh, but, David Takashima. Appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Okay, before we'll take some questions for a few minutes, guys. So if you want to fire away on some questions, that you have for the off season, and then we'll end the show with that. Really quickly, just I want to have each of us rank like the from most likely to least likely to return the season from those 6 players. So
Ooh, who wants to go first? Also, I need this list up because I'm not smart enough to remember. So
yeah, I was gonna say put the list back up. I can't remember shit.
Okay, so we're ranking them in terms of most likely to return to least likely to return. As opposed to like ranking them in like in terms of play style and stuff like that. So I'll start first. I'm gonna say Trey Pipkins most likely. I will say Drew Tranquil second, and then I'm gonna say Bryce Callahan, DeAndre Carter, Kyle Van Noy, Morgan Fox.
Okay, I'll go Trey Pipkins first. I'll go Callahan second, mostly because he's going to be inexpensive. Then I will go Tranquil because they kind of have to. I don't believe that Carter's coming back, to be completely honest. But
I think he's just cheap.
Right. So I'll go Trey, Callahan, Tranquil. I'm going to say Fox because he's Staley's guy. Then Van Noy, then Carter. I just think they're moving on from Carter.
I'll go most likely to least likely. Morgan Fox 1, Tranquil 2, Pipkins 3, Carter 4, and then I think both of these guys, Bryce Callahan and Kyle Van Noy, I think you could have them in either 5 or 6, but I just think end up pricing themselves out of the Chargers. And so therefore I kind of have them at 5 or 6, and then Chargers kind of get a comp pick, let them walk, and then replace them through, free agency or the draft.
Yeah. The comp pick formula it didn't work to the Chargers' advantage this year. Obviously they spent way too much money in free agency, but next year they should get, some good comp picks. So, Kyle Van Noy leaves, Morgan Fox leaves. Those will be, hard to replace in terms of contracts. So, it would be very interesting to see how it plays out. We're just we have a little over a month until free agency starts. So obviously something to keep an eye on. All right, we'll take some questions here. Simon G starting us off. He wants to know if there's anyone we are keeping a close eye on today at the Senior Bowl. Obviously been going on all week. What I will say is that a couple of my friends who were at the Senior Bowl have told me that the Chargers representatives were keeping a close eye on the edge rushers in particular, Mr. Keon White from Georgia Tech and Will McDonald from Iowa State. So those are 2 players that they have really been focusing in on at the Senior Bowl. 2 edge rushers, probably. Maybe Keon White might be a first-round prospect. It seems that he's got a lot of fans around the league, but Will McDonald probably a second-round prospect. So those are 2 guys that by default, I think we all have to keep an eye on. And then Jaden Reed, the receiver from Michigan State. I'm a big fan of his after watching his tape this week. And he's been, from most accounts, the best receiver at the Senior Bowl. So he's somebody who has been a prolific punt returner in college. He's, I think, somebody that could be a really good fit as a backside Z receiver for this team. I think he probably is like a mid 4.4 guy. So he's not a burner by any means, but he would be an upgrade in speed. And he's just a very well-rounded receiver, which we know that Brandon Staley wants his guys to be able to run every route in the tree and also be fast, not just fast. So I think Jaden Reed, receiver from Michigan State, is somebody to keep an eye on as well.
You basically took everyone.
Sorry.
Luke Musgrave. Obviously, I'm gonna check out what he's doing because apparently he can run 20 miles an hour at 6'6" or whatever. He definitely is very fast off the line on tape, but I'm really curious to see what he does. Am I a fan of him at 21? Not really, but if you don't go receiver, but you want to find someone who can run pretty fast as hell for his size with the athleticism you want, Musgrave's a fun one.
Yeah, Musgrave to me is tight end too. Like I love what I see from Musgrave from an athletic profile standpoint. I think he's a really well-rounded blocker as well. So I'm a big fan of him. In terms of other tight ends, there's Purdue tight end Payne Durham, I believe his name is, if I remember correctly from today. Kind of a discount version of Michael Mayer. We're just kind of solid at everything. really gave me like strong Hunter Henry vibes when I was watching him this morning. So that's another one to keep an eye on.
I missed it. Who was the Hunter Henry vibes?
Payne Durham, the tight end from Purdue.
Oh, cool. Haven't watched him, but nice.
Yeah, he was voted the tight end of the week on his team. Favorite prospect you've seen so far? Either of you guys have one that stands out? Not necessarily like top prospect, but just someone you've really enjoyed watching.
Okay, I've only watched like 7. So sure, I do have a favorite. I guess it's Dalton Kincaid, but it's not like I've gone through like, oh, I've watched Jalen Carter, I've watched, all these really good, players and everything. Not that Kincaid's not a good player, but I mean, I haven't fallen in love with a player yet. I'll say that much. It wasn't Luke Van Ness.
Are we talking about like
that was a rough watch,
or just overall prospect?
Just like overall, board? Somebody that you really like watching.
Yeah, I have not watched that much tape. Quentin Johnston.
Oh, I didn't like watching him at all.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I didn't like watching him at all. He's 6'4" and he plays like he's 5'11". I'm not into it.
All right.
I loved watching Siaki Ika, the nose tackle from Baylor. Like just somebody that Salt Lake's finest. First of all, went to East High School where my parents went to high school. And just somebody like 340 pounds, but it can actually rush the passer pretty well. So if the Chargers needed a nose tackle, he'd be somebody that I'd be very interested in. So I've loved watching him. Solo Man with a super chat really quickly says, "You guys ready for RAS season?" LOL.
Yes. Yeah, I actually have in my personal rankings. I'm going to have RAS rankings so I can keep track this year. And yes, I'm ready. I can't wait for another nose tackle to jump 32 feet like Jordan Davis did.
I don't know if we're getting that this year.
Or some edge rusher to run like a 4.39 or something like that kid from Virginia Tech last year. Barno, I think his name was.
Oh, Amari Barno?
Yeah.
It's amazing how fast I've forgotten some of these players.
DZ said, for what it's worth, he is concerned with Tito's injury, same as JC, but he's a big boy. I think defensive tackle, I think, is a sneaky need in this year. I mean, Austin Johnson's a free agent next year. Tino's obviously coming off of his injury. Brain Fehoko, free agent next year. So I wouldn't be shocked if we do see them take a defensive tackle in like the first 5 rounds.
Yeah. I mean, I think a ruptured patella tendon is bad in either case. I would say it's probably less bad for Otito, given that he's younger, and also that, I mean, he's not going to move or run as fast as a quarterback on play-to-play basis. So for me, I am less concerned about that one, but I do still think we could see them invest some capital in a defensive tackle in general.
Sure. LDE Bruin wants to know, do we think that both Gerald Everett and Donald Parham might be gone this year? So obviously Daniel Popper did list Gerald Everett as a potential cut candidate this year, frees up $4.5 million to move off of him. I think Donald Parham is a restricted free agent, or is he straight up unrestricted?
RFA.
Okay, so they can easily bring back Donald Parham again if they want to. I think for me, like, if you're cutting Gerald Everett, you're saying that we're absolutely drafting a tight end in the first round. Like, I don't think you have a choice if you cut Gerald Everett to do anything but take a tight end in the first round. So I don't know. Like, I think that it's hard for me to envision them improving the tight end room by saying, hey, we're going to cut Gerald Everett. Maybe we sign somebody like Tyler Kroft, super cheap, and then also draft a first round tight end. So to me, it just makes the most sense to draft a tight end and keep Gerald Everett.
Yeah, I totally get why financially you would cut Gerald Everett. I mean, they could save $4.5 million, right? If they were to move on, right? So, I mean, in that sense, you could just kind of move on. But yeah, I mean, Everett and Parham being gone and then being left with Trey McKinney as your tight end one is a pretty ghastly scenario. that should scare Chargers fans. Parham, I don't think will be as hard to bring back, but you would still spend a significant amount on him, right? Because he's not on IRFA anymore. So instead, you're probably spending $2 or $3 million to bring him back as opposed to $700K. Just from that standpoint, I think one of them will be gone. Less likely that both are gone.
Yeah, at some point they're going to do the whole, well, we drafted a player and we got to see something. So I think that could be with Trey McKitty this year. You know, would love to keep Donald Parham. I don't see why, if no one picks him up at some point later in the year, that he couldn't return, but the Chargers don't really do that. So I think it's Everett. I think it's a draft pick. I think it's Trey McKitty. If Parham's back, great. I don't see like a reason on the field to cut him. It's just, you know, if we're penny pinching and you're worried about the injuries, yeah, I guess you have to.
Yeah, and they still have Stone Smart that they like him too. So, Josh Jepson, I don't know. I'm going to say Jepson. Why did we pay a predominant man coverage corner to play in a zone scheme? So I've seen this floated around on Twitter. The Chargers actually ran man coverage at one of the highest rates in the league this year. And they did that a lot with JC Jackson. Like if you look at their coverage numbers against the Chiefs, you look at the coverage numbers against the Seahawks before he got injured, it was a lot of man coverage. Like he was isolated in man coverage quite a lot in those two games. So I understand that there's a lot of, this isn't like a pure man scheme. Like they don't just they're not the Patriots where they line up and play man coverage every single snap, but they were top 10, I believe, in man coverage usage this year. So the Chargers do play man coverage quite a lot. I think Brandon Staley has talked about his desire to be able to do that quite frequently as the head coach and defensive coordinator. So just wanted to clear that up. They do play a lot of man coverage. The Chargers do.
And for what it's worth, if we looked at when they first, or when we were talking about them signing JC and when they did sign JC, Arjun made that graphic or had that graphic that JC was basically equally good in man and zone. So it's not like, oh gosh, he has to play man or he won't be good or he has to play, like he was equally good at both. Probably, maybe I guess better at man if you had to pick, but the graphic pretty clearly demonstrated and conveyed that like this is not a one-way kind of player. He can do either. So it just didn't work out to start the season.
Yeah, what do you guys a lot of people asking earlier about like JC scrubbing his Instagram. Like I love that stuff is back this offseason, but it's so silly. Like he didn't just delete Chargers pictures, he deleted all of his pictures. Like,
yeah,
you know, pro athletes like to just delete stuff from time to time. I don't think there's anything to take away from that.
Yeah, I mean, also, regardless of Instagram, they can't financially move on from him.
Right.
So, doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
If a year or two from now he's deleting Instagram pictures, maybe it's a different discussion, but there's no possible way to move on. So.
Yeah, no, there's, unless something legally pops up or something ridiculous pops up, no, they're stuck. They're not stuck. They're going to have to, work with him.
Yeah, there you go. All right, we'll take one more question. So if you haven't had a chance to ask a question, fire away.
Wait, I have a question.
Okay.
Hold on.
Go for it. We'll do Alex's and then one other question.
Super Bowl score predictions.
Of course. Go ahead.
Oh, do you want my unbiased or my biased prediction?
Unbiased.
I'll do biased first. Biased 400-0, unbiased 33-23 Eagles.
Wow, 10 points.
Yeah.
That's unbiased.
That's the unbiased one. 400 points was the biased one.
Okay.
What's the
It's 2.5.
The Eagles by 2.5 or Chiefs?
Eagles by 2.5.
Okay. I do have some bias as a sort of Eagles fan in the family, but I'll go. I do think the Eagles win. I picked them anyway, so I might as well, ride it out. 28-24.
I think that sounds more right. I think Mahomes will be able to keep it close. I think, having the 2 weeks off, him and Kelsey will get healthy.
Yeah.
But I do think the Eagles will win for what it's worth. So I'll say 27-23 Eagles. Super chat from Christian Hernandez. I appreciate it, man. Trading from 21 to number 1, you'd have to give away like 2 future first round picks, 2 future second round picks. The Chargers need those picks.
Oh, they mean trade up to the number 1 pick in the draft.
Yes.
Oh,
because that's where you'd have to go. That's where you'd have to go to get Jalen Carter or Will Anderson.
Maybe you could trade back with the Bears after they make a trade back already. But I mean, yeah, I don't know. If the Bears want to go full Howie Roseman, then fine. But other than that, yeah, you're not trading up to number 1.
Yeah, if they want to get back to the second round and get 2 second round picks instead of the first round pick, that makes sense to me. You know,
the problem with Tom Telesco is not that he doesn't trade up enough. Like,
yeah, it's that he never trades down.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. I think Thomas gave us a food question. Do we want to answer the food question?
Sure. Let's do it. What is it?
What's the food question?
Very on brand for us. He says best fast food option without a drive-through, i.e. Panda Express.
Okay, I think Panda I just passed
Express fast food.
Panda. Yeah.
Basically. I mean, it's like anywhere where you can sit down and get your meal within like 5 minutes.
Okay.
Jeez. Is Fuddruckers fast food?
Fuddruckers.
It is, yes.
All right, give me a good old Fuddruckers with their cheese dip and fries and, well, you know, burger and all that.
I like it. I'll say the one that I frequent the most is the Habit, just because like they have
I was gonna say that
variety. Too. I like their salads. They're one of the few places that I can actually like go to and get a salad, and I like their burgers. So yeah, fry game is weak. Their fry game is weak, but I think it's just the one I use the most because it's the easiest and it has good options.
Not
Steven, where did we eat in Vegas?
The like sandwich and soup place.
Yes.
It was called Zupa's. It's a Utah, Vegas, Idaho chain thing. It's not like a national chain.
Huh. Okay,
yeah, it's good though. I like Zupa's. Alex?
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, probably not to wage too far into Burger Wars, but Five Guys.
Okay. I like Five Guys. It's expensive. It's expensive to eat at Five Guys, so I will say that.
I mean, I'm not going to a fast food burger place more than once or twice a year because I live on an island and there's no fast food burger places.
Yeah,
so if I do go to one, it's like once in the summer. But yeah.
One of the
you go to Chipotle and get the Herbert Bowl or whatever.
Yeah,
there's a Herbert Bowl at Chipotle.
Yeah, you know how like they make those commercials for it. It's like it's their garlic guajillo steak, and then it's like double rice, double beans. I can't remember the exact order, but it's with their new
double
steak.
Beans at Chipotle? I don't know. that sounds like a risky gambit.
Just do Chipotle chicken and cheese like Orlovsky.
Oh my god! Did you see his video yesterday of the nachos?
Yeah.
You guys gotta stop responding to him. He knows how to farm the quote tweets. Like he knows how to beat the system. You guys gotta stop doing it.
It was a video. So it was a video of who sent it? Laura Rutledge sent it out. It wasn't Dan, but his go-to nacho order is just like the chips, cheese, and chicken. Like this man has the taste buds of a 4-year-old. I swear.
Yeah.
But Chipotle is really hit or miss for me. Like sometimes you get a bowl and it's like half empty and it's just like, okay, what are we doing here? So yeah. All right, there we go. Christian Hernandez with the second one. He says trade for T. Higgins then. If they want Keenan Allen in return, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I like how we just talked about for the first 30 minutes of the show, like debated the cap implications of Keenan Allen, and now we're like, okay, here's a receiver who's probably going to be $10 million more expensive than Keenan Allen. Like,
I appreciate the super chat though, and I'm a big fan of T. Higgins, but it's like,
I love T. Higgins.
You're talking about teams are talking about trading a first round pick for him, like,
yeah.
So, is what it is. All right, Alex, any final thoughts before we head out for today?
No, that's about it for today. I don't know how big into the Senior Bowl I'll be, but I will be watching the other game next week, and so yeah, go Birds.
Yeah, go Birds. Alex is officially shifting into his medical school full time, so he'll be sticking around on the channel doing some bowl breakdown videos for us. So really appreciative of his time on the show. For those who haven't been listening for a while, there was a little bit of a time after we started when it was me and Alex only, and Alex was recording inside of his closet. So always fond memories looking back at those. So he'll be sticking around, jumping on the show for big items in the future. But wishing him nothing but the best with his medical school journey full time here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I'm not leaving the channel. I'm just going out to buy some milk. I'll be back. I'll be around on the channel to do bolt breakdowns. To do bolt breakdowns and do stuff like that. I'll be around when we do the draft, and whenever you guys need to fill in anytime. So this isn't necessarily a goodbye, because I'll still be around making a video every week, I guess. So you'll still get your content. But yeah, best of luck to Steven and Tyler. I've always been appreciative from day one. I mean, like Steven said, I started doing the show from a closet in Houston. I did not think that 3 years later I would be living on an island and this is my life now, or that the channel would get to 8,000 subscribers and all of these milestones that we've hit along the way. So, just happy to be here.
Come on, unmute Tyler. There we go. No, I mean, and obviously very happy to have you. It wouldn't have continued. I had to go do my stem cell research program the first year after like 4 or 5 months or whatever it was. And then Alex was able to fill in because Jason went off to the military, and we would be stuck or restarting or something. And so, Alex really kept it together, and I love everyone's, chats comments in the chat throughout the last couple of weeks, kind of like knowing this was sort of happening, but without really saying it. Then of course today, it's good to have your perspective as always. We've worked together at Bolt Beat and here. So we'll continue to do that as well. And I will certainly be, up to my ears in ed TPA and, certain teaching credential stuff. So you'll be on the show, probably the next show, honestly. No, I'm kidding. But it won't be like a long-term goodbye or anything. But, of course, we always appreciated having you. And it's best of luck and everything you're doing moving forward too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for everything. We're lots of 2 master's degrees, a doctor on the show, so we got a lot of education power on the show. So always appreciative.
Yeah, always appreciative. Willing to join on anytime you guys need me. I will not be on shows after the Sixers are eliminated anymore, because I did that last year and I'm not doing that again. But yeah, free to jump on anytime. And yeah.
I'll be sure to pencil you in on the schedule for the interior offensive line episode.
Hell yeah. Let's get in the trenches, baby.
Yeah. We'll start it at 9 PST too.
Oh, fuck. No. Yeah, there is an advantage to the 1 or 2 a.m. shows being as sparse, but those did produce some of our best content. So
yeah, absolutely. So again, big shout out to Alex. Kept the show alive with me. Throughout that first summer after the COVID summer, which was a ridiculous time where we were talking about nothing, and then Alex was doing the preview shows with me every single week. So. Can't thank him enough for helping us continue to take the show to new heights. So that's going to do it for us today, guys. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. As always, if you are listening to this, please leave a rating and review. We always appreciate all of that positive feedback. And we'll see you guys soon.